What's going on, everybody? Hotep family, Ashe to all my people out there. Welcome to another episode of My Unapologetic Perspective here on the Mighty Motivation Network. This is the podcast where we give our point of view of controversial topics based off Black history, our experience, and our knowledge as African Americans. In the words of Maya Angelou, do your best until you know better, and when you know better, do better. So it's important to search for information to discover what you don't know so you can discover your best you. I am your host, Martre Baker Stevens, and to the right of me is Shaquan Battle. And to the right of him is last week. This week is going to be phenomenal as well. For everybody to know that we're in Women's History Month, and just like Black History Month, Women's History Month is not restrained to just 1 month. It is 12 months, 365, because you can't talk about Black history, you can't talk about American history, you can't talk about world history without including women and their contributions and their influence and movements and change and social issues in this country. But just by doing some of the research that we've done to prepare for this episode, what are some of the things that stood out to you about Black women in this country?
Mine would be sexism from white people, Black people, much of what you see still going on today.
And I would agree with that. I would think that would be 1A, and then 1B and 1C would be strength and resilience.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you had these women saying and doing things that women didn't do back then, let alone Black women didn't say or do these type of things. And you had these women that we're getting ready to talk about, they were doing it and very impactful in doing so.
Absolutely. And I agree with much what you guys are saying, because again, you can't discuss Black history women or dating Black women or encounter Black women. No, you're not going to do things without them having to say so in what you're doing. They're always going to be outspoken in their in the way that they handle things and the way that they move in this world. But you can't look at any type of movement and not understand that Black women had an influence in those movements. Whether you talk about abolitionists, whether you talk about the anti-lynchings, whatever you talk about the expansion of education, women's suffrage, civil rights movement, Black Panther Party movement, and voting, and even now with the Black Lives Matter movement, you can't talk about those movements without talking about the influence of Black women.
And not just the influence, the leadership.
Absolutely.
The leadership of Black women. And I think that's where the sexism comes in effect even now, is that we love for women to be powerful and have a perspective or opinion, but yet we don't give them the leadership or the pay.
Absolutely. And I, for one, if you think about some of the most powerful women that we talk about on a normal basis, a lot of times they're talked about in the light of being that support
behind the scenes,
you know, the wife or the mother. They're looked at in that light. But let's be honest for a second, that you can't talk about Barack Obama, the first African American president, without talking about Michelle Obama, who graduated from Harvard University. Was an intelligent woman who mentored Barack Obama at a law firm, and who had, let's be honest, a lot of people didn't just vote for Barack Obama because of Barack Obama.
That's right.
It was the leadership, the ideas from Michelle Obama during that campaign that got Barack Obama elected. You can't talk about Dr. King without talking about the intelligence and the influence of Coretta Scott King, who was already an educated woman as well. And during the civil rights movement, she was a leader during the civil rights movement. Even after Dr. King's death, she still continued to do activism on the LGBTQ and AIDS and even stuff in South Africa. You can't talk about Malcolm X without talking about Betty Shabazz, right? Because Betty, before she even, that's what attracted Malcolm, was her intelligence.
That's right.
You know, she grew up in a foster home, and in the foster home, they taught her certain principles to live by, and she stood by that. She was already in activism at an early age on supporting Black businesses and not supporting those white businesses that would not hire Black people. So we talk about somebody, she went to Tuskegee Institute and graduated from a nursing program in New York. So when you talk about the influence of Black women, they weren't just wives, they weren't just mothers. That's part of their title of what they did. But when you talk about the influence of their husbands, again, Black women never stay quiet. So there's some things that came out of Malcolm's mouth, that came out of Dr. King's mouth, that came out of Barack Obama's mouth, that came from the Black woman.
Absolutely. The other thing is that we talk about them in that sense in the supporting role, even though we know behind the scenes they were probably leading that charge.
Right.
But we're ready to talk about some women who, when we talk about strength and leadership, they went through similar things that people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X went through, because we know the people that suffered the most with their leadership and activism that they were doing were their families. Mm-hmm. And these women that we're going to talk about today sacrificed that family relationship, that mother being in the homes in a lot of situations. Sojourner Truth, who we're going to talk about, she had to leave her kids behind to escape slavery. Mm-hmm. So, and then throughout, some of these women had to leave their families behind to escape the hatred that they were receiving from the things that they were doing. So they sacrificed their families the same way that Martin Luther King and Malcolm X did.
Absolutely. One of the reasons I want to do this topic is not just to celebrate our Black women. We actually had an earlier episode, I think it was episode 3, where we celebrated Black women in the education system. But there's just a lot of sexism and racism that we talked about within these movements that kind of people don't actually talk about, right? So even in the civil rights movement, you talked about on the previous episodes on the Black Panther Party movement. But one of the ones that a lot of people don't talk about, especially during this time of Women History Month, because you want that unification, is they faced racism within the women's suffrage movement.
That's right.
Right? So, you know, a lot of times in the late 1800s, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Canton worked very closely with Frederick Douglass, and their goal was to create voting rights for everybody.
That's right.
Black men, Black women, white women as well. But what ended up happening was, with the 15th Amendment passing, Black men got the right to vote. And a lot of white Southern women did not feel that was ideal to allow Black men the ability to vote when they were considered lesser than the white race the time. So there was a lot of discrepancy within the women's suffrage movement early on, because it seems like Black women could be sacrificed at any moment, not just by white women, but by Black men.
That's right.
To say, okay, we'll settle with getting the right to vote, even if our women can't. White women that say, you know, we'll settle with being right to vote, even if Black women can't. You know, so everybody wanted to have the support of Black women, but Black women didn't always have the support of other people during that time. And one of the things that happened was that, of course, after Black men were able to vote, there was a woman of one of the movements named last name Willard. She did an interview, and she was close with Black people, working very closely with Ida B. Wells and Sojourner Truth and those people. But she did an interview saying that Black men that couldn't read or write should not be able to vote over white women.
That's right.
You know, and she stood behind her Southern heritage, the same people who were lynching, killing, and segregating themselves from Black men. And, you know, one of the ones I want to first talk about is Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells challenged that theory to say that you're supposed to be for all women, but yet when it comes to these type of causes, you stand behind your white men that kill and lynch and hurt Black people. But Ida B. Wells was born into slavery 6 months before emancipation. And at an early age, she had learned how to read. And her father, after slavery, began to become real political. You know, he became a real advocate on voting and all of those things. So she would read the newspaper to all of the people who couldn't read.
They call him the race man, right?
Race man.
Race
So
man.
she would read the newspaper. But when she became a school teacher, she began teaching at the age of 14. For the people who go back to Black history, a lot of people who just had like a 5th, 6th grade education level could be able to teach other people, because a lot of people were already couldn't read or write. But what ended up happening was she ended up moving to Memphis, and she was on a train. And on the train, she was asked to move back to which was called the smoking section. And she refused, and she was dragged by 3 men on that train. Again, before Claudette Colvin, before Rosa Parks, before these people, this happened on the train. She actually ended up suing the railroad and winning $500. But on the appeal, she ended up losing. And in the appeal, they ended up belittling her, which really started her advocation on speaking up for herself. And she began to do a lot of writings, and she bought a share of the Free Speech newspaper. And she began to do a lot of writings about the gap in education between Black people and white people. And a lot of people say if you read those things today, it would still apply to modern day because her writings were so powerful. And she actually used a different pen name. She didn't actually go by her actual name, so she wanted to remain
She wrote about a lot of things too, the voting as well. So just to put this in perspective real quick, so for those that may not know, Black men were actually allowed to vote in 1870. That was the 14th Amendment. And it, as long as you was a citizen, you could vote. Yeah. The problem is, of course, as most people know, we weren't actually able to practice that in the South until 1965. Right. And what happened is they had the Jim Crow laws.
Well, after the Reconstruction period.
Right. Right. So you had the Jim Crow laws that you could vote in the South, but you had to pass the literacy test. Yeah. Those are things that they did to try to make it a little more difficult for you to vote. So that was 1870. Technically, Black men had the right to vote. Right. And in the North, they did so. In the South, not so much. Women were not allowed to vote until 1920, which is the suffrage.
Right. The 19th Amendment.
That's right. The 19th Amendment. So just to put that in perspective, so the viewers can understand what we're actually talking about. And again, that was a 50-year gap.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, that was 50 years later that white women got the right to vote after Black men were allowed to vote.
Absolutely.
And the people who got left out in that equation, as you mentioned, was Black women.
Right. And, you know, Ida B. Wells' writings really went to another level after 3 of her friends were lynched in Memphis. They owned a grocery store, which was right across the street from a white grocery store. And the white grocery store wasn't doing as well as the Black grocery store. So it was a lot of conflict, to where a confrontation ended up happening. And of course, the white men were badly injured. And
it started out with 2 boys rolling dice, playing marbles.
Yeah.
And then they got into a fight. The Black boy was getting the better of the white boy, and the owner of the store came out, jumped in, and started punching on the Black boy. Yeah. And one of the store owners came, I think his last name was Stewart, and fired a shot.
Henry Stewart.
Yeah, fired a shot and didn't hit anybody, but fired a shot. And then the next day or a couple days later, some guys came and all hell broke loose.
They were arrested. The mob came in, took them out the cell, which is, I think we've said this on 3 different people on this podcast that ended up happening to, and they would end up lynched. But Ida B. Wells began to do her own investigations on lynching in the South. And what she discovered was most of the time, 1/3 of the time, were the people actually accused of something.
That's right.
So just put that into perspective. Only 1/3 of the time you're actually accused of doing something.
That's right.
But the accusations most of the time was a rape of a white woman, or an accused rape of a white woman, and an accused killing or injuring a white man. And most of the time you didn't get a fair trial to see what happened, if they were actually guilty or innocent. But most of the time they were lynched. And one of the things that Ida B. Wells wrote about was you couldn't find many black people in the South who were willing to rape a white woman, who were willing to kill a white man because they knew the consequences. So a lot of these cases they considered to be bogus. And that's why they ended up lynching them, because if it went to a court, it would be a lot of discrepancy on if it was true or not. But she began to write these in a newspaper talking about the lynchings and how they were wrong and how white women and white men were lying about these cases. And to the point where white people ended up ransacking her newspaper office, to where the point she had to end up leaving Memphis. Mm-hmm. But she continued on her investigation. But one thing I want to point out about Ida B. Wells was something that we always talk about when it comes to Brother Malcolm and even Martin, about her international approach. Right. And it began at the World Fair in Chicago with Frederick Douglass, 1893. At the World Fair, there was no black representation for African Americans in America, which for people who don't know, the World Fair is to talk about a nation's accomplishments and culture. Mm-hmm. And there was no representation of African Americans that wasn't stereotyped. Of course, you had the black face and all of those type of things there. But Frederick Douglass was the only African American represented there, but he wasn't representing America. He was representing Haiti. That's right. The Haitian government. So Ida B. Wells, Frederick Douglass, and her soon-to-be husband, Barnett, they created their own pamphlet talking about the oppression in America. And they handed out the pamphlets to international people that was there. And that was one of the first cases where you see in America where somebody gets internationally involved with the things that's going on in America. Of course, Frederick Douglass, I think he went to London at one point and began to do the same thing before all of that happened. But it got to the point where they offered Frederick Douglass, where they gave him a day to talk about African-American accomplishments in history. And Ida B. Wells decided she wasn't going to go to that, because she said one day was not equality. And we still see that today with Black History Month. It's always, we'll give you a month, we'll give you a day, we'll give you that, celebrate, but the rest of the time is for white America. That's right. But again, we talked about it off air, how she helped co-found the NAACP. She was there at Niagara Falls when they created the NAACP. That's right. But when it came out on who the founders were, her name was removed. And she was surprised that her name was removed. And she felt that it was due to W.E. Du Bois was not advanced or progressive towards women's rights and women leadership. That it was a form of sexism. Absolutely. But another thing she did that I found very interesting, because we still see this to this day, which is she became the president of the Negro Fellowship League, which was smack dead in the hood, right in the projects and the worst of the worst. So for the people who don't understand the Negro Fellowship League, people don't understand rec centers, youth centers that are in the black community. The white communities had the YMCA and the YWCA. These are was organizations built to build Christian principles, but it was only for white people. Black people weren't allowed to go into those YMCAs and YWCAs. So Ida B. Wells created her own to be able to help people that was migrating from the South to the North, because that's another thing she advocated for in her newspaper, was for people to leave the South and move to these northern cities.
Well, actually, that grocery owner, that was one of his last words that he told the lynch mob: tell my people to move north or west. Right. There's no justice here for us.
Right, because she was an anti-lynching movement. So she understand the lynchings that was happening in the South, and the only place to move, like when you hear about the expansion, with the Great Migration, most people say black people move for greater jobs. That's only half the truth. A lot of people are moving because they want to get the hell away from the South and the lynching.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? But we always talk about, trying to be that solution. And that's one of the things that she was, by creating that fellowship league. It was even to the point where it was one encounter where they said people was outside of the league, outside of the building, rolling dice and drinking alcohol. And they said that they asked Ada, you want us to go tell them to move? And she said no. She went out there with her white gloves on and her fancy clothes and went out there and said, look, when y'all done, come on in here so I can help y'all.
That's right.
And that's the type of person she was. You know what I mean? But another key thing I want to talk about is we praise Brother Malcolm for, you know, his advocate of self-defense. His advocate, you know, you see people reenact the picture of him with the rifle in his hands looking out the window.
That's right.
But one of Ida B. Wells' famous quotes is, a Winchester rifle should be in the place of every black home for protection.
That's right.
You know, and she carried a Winchester in her home because even though she lived in Chicago, she never conformed to, I only have to live in the black area. Mm-hmm. Her and her husband would live in areas where they weren't welcome. So she always kept a gun on her and she always had a Winchester in her home. So just going through a little bit of Ida B. Wells, I'll let y'all add in a little bit more into her and y'all thoughts about what we just went through.
I'm going to speak to the international awareness that she brought. I thought was one, again, that was that insight that we talk about Malcolm X, but we're talking about 70 years before Malcolm X.
Facts.
That Ida B. Wells also did the same thing. And speaking of Frederick Douglass, and we'll talk a little bit more about him when we talk about Sojourner Truth, but there was a time after he had asked her to come and she declined because he felt there wasn't equality, that he asked her to go to Britain with him. And she went. And when she was there, once again, as always, they talked about, you know, trying to be a little more moderate in what you talk about over here because we don't want to get the international attention. Again, she defied, and she did some lectures in Britain where she talked about certain things and the treatment of black people in America. And to the point that the New York Times at the time, she was publishing a newspaper in New York, but even the New York Times bashed her for doing that. Yeah, which she still didn't care.
Lady Somerset actually tried to stop some of them from coming out in Britain.
Absolutely.
And they still released it.
Yes.
Lady Somerset actually tried to talk to Frederick Douglass about, hey, can you get her to tone it down a little bit? Frederick Douglass said, nah, I can't do it.
I think that's funny. I know we laugh now, but when you first sent me the agenda for the podcast, you said we want to talk about the fact that women would not shut up.
Women would not shut up.
Because that's what they wanted them to do. And we're not being disrespectful when we use that term shut up, because that's what they wanted black women to do. They wanted them to shut up. These women refused to shut up.
Right.
They could not shut up. They did not just shut up and dribble. Yeah. Right. They didn't do that. So I thought that the fact that that's what you called it when you sent us the agenda, I thought tells the real story about what these women contributed, but more importantly, the strength and the resilience that it took for them to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
I'm only gonna speak for myself on this one. Is the women, black women will never shut up, and it's, you think about, like I said, I'm only speaking for me. You think about your wife, right? And like, we all date black women, so, and it's times in your head you like, man, I just wish you would shut up. But most of the time they're right.
Right. Because that truth is real sometimes, and sometimes like a lot of black men, let's be honest, a lot of black men admit to not dating black women because of that strong presence.
Right. That's right.
Because of that mouth. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Because they tell you the truth when you don't want to hear it. You know what I mean?
Tell you a funny story. So my mom, you said when you're a kid, your mom tells you, brush your teeth, right? You brush your teeth, right? But you don't really know why. And it hopefully becomes a habit, right? Go and brush your teeth, you brush your teeth. And after a while, you just do it. And one day, I don't know if it was Alvin or Eugene, they asked my mom, so why you always want to brush your teeth? She said, well, you don't understand some of it, but part of it is your breath stink, right? Which, when your mom tell you that, you laugh, you blow it in the face, But the first time a little girl tell you your breath stink, right, feelings hurt, you're going to get the gum. And we ate Big Red, get that Big Red gum, that kill anything, right? So when a girl tells you something, it changes the dynamics of the information, right? So we learn early age that women are impactful in what men do and how we do it and why we do it. I tell a story all the time. When we were younger, we played basketball where the girls at. We go to the car wash where the girls at. They impacted everything that we did. So the fact that women had that kind of power tells you the kind of power that they had in these situations with these powerful men, because you can't have a powerful man without having a powerful woman behind them. And the way that these men, they were complicated. So to have a woman that could deal with that at that level tells you the strength of a woman, especially a black woman.
Absolutely.
There's nothing more strong, and we see evidence.
Right.
There's nothing more stronger than a black woman, that you could actually bring a child into this world in the conditions of slavery under being raped by a slave owner, but yet you have the child and you love that child.
Right.
And you're willing to die for that child. There's nothing stronger than the love of a black woman for their child.
Right.
And that continues on to even to today. I mean, we laugh and joke about it. I remember the first time they got physical on the basketball court with you, your mom shut down the whole damn game. And you were the biggest kid on the court. You know what I mean? Nothing comes between that, a black woman and her child. But the strength of that black woman to endure some of the things that they endured in during slavery and after slavery through the women's suffrage, even up to the 60s, even up to today, shows you the strength and the resilience of a black woman.
All right. And we're not going to get through all this today. I'm just going to put it out there to you right now. But what you just said is key, because Ida B. Wells talked about, after she had her kid, that she was the only woman probably traveling, still doing activism work with her kid, still nursing her baby. You know what I'm saying? And then I look on Instagram and I see these WNBA players who got to go out of the country and they got their kids with them.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? They don't have, LeBron James can go play in the bubble and his wife taking care of things. He ain't got to worry about the kids. He can just play in the bubble. But some of these WNBA players that have kids, they're on the airplane with them.
They don't make that kind of money.
They don't make that kind of money. But they still have to sacrifice some of their life for their kids, but they still try to live out their dreams and still try to create change within that. And we still see that today.
They also have to sacrifice their careers, because when they have a child, they can't play.
They can't play. Well, some of them still play up until the doctor tell them, you can't.
Think about how many potential R&B artists, female artists, that could not be R&B artists because they got pregnant.
Yeah.
Because there's no way to market a pregnant R&B singer that's not married. How do I market that, right? So imagine how many women sacrificed their careers to have a child, and did not regret it.
That's a whole nother podcast.
That's a whole nother podcast.
That's a whole nother podcast.
That shows you the strength and the resilience of a black woman.
Yeah.
And I know some people are going to say, they're just doing that because it's a podcast.
No.
Now, this is real. This is who we are.
Yeah.
And I can say that because they're my son. So obviously, this is who we are. They were raised by strong black women.
Facts.
Right? So I think at the end of the day, when we talk about these women, we can see how they did the groundwork. And then this is important. This is probably the most important part when you put it in summary of all these women. When we talk about Sojourner Truth, Ida B. Wells, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou, when we talk about these women, the thing that they did is they went through all this not for them.
Yeah,
they didn't go through. We talk about Fannie Lou. She registered to vote. She went to try to register to vote every 30 days. She had to take a literacy test. Every 30 days she went. She told them, expect me every 30 days.
Yeah.
She got beat. She got shot at 15 times.
Got fired from a job.
But she kept going, not for her, but for us, so that we can go vote today. These are people that put it on the line on the dead, literally. When we talk about putting it on the line, we talk about putting it on the line.
And that still holds truth today. I seen a post one day that say, men can choose when they want to be in their kid's life.
That's right.
A woman can't do that. So they have to sacrifice so much, not just for them, but for their kid. And we see so many black women. We talk about single parent homes, but so many black women have to put their life on the back burner and make so many sacrifices, not for themselves, but for their kids and for the people that's coming behind them. And that's key. But hold on, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. And we are back, and we're going to jump back in. You was about to say something.
Oh, yeah, just to piggyback off of what you was just about to say about, women's lives being put on hold when, I have kids. I remember the first time me and Dad had the conversation about child support. He looked at me and said, nigga, when the baby's sick, you still get to go to work.
Yeah.
The mama got to stay home. So when a woman gets pregnant, her life changes right then and there. As soon as she find out she's pregnant, your life doesn't alter at all.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. And we were just talking off air that sometimes we're programmed to be sexist, just as, you know, as kids and living in a household. If you had a sister, I know you guys grew up, had an aunt who lived with you that was raised just like a sister with you guys. She probably did the cooking and cleaning when your mom wasn't there, right? You know, so a lot of those things were based on how we were raised. So obviously, when we look back at these times with these black men like Frederick, and I'm not excusing them,
right? Frederick
Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois and even Booker T. Washington, who, you know, a lot of people don't know, he was involved in this sexism a little bit as well.
Booker T. Martin Delaney.
Absolutely. So, you know, and I'm not making excuses for him, but I'm just saying that's how it was. And then again, makes what these women did even that more powerful, because that's how it was, and they went against the grain.
Yeah. So
they're going against the grain against white women, and they went against the grain against white men, but they also went against the grain against black men. So you have black men who's going, wait a minute, we on your side. I can't tell. You know, you want us to be behind you in your movement, but you want us to be quiet when we start talking about women's rights, right? You know,
and that's why women always say they got it twice as hard, because number one, they black, and then number two, they're a woman.
And that's what ended up happening with the passing of the 19th Amendment of the women getting the right to vote. Again, black women weren't able to practice their vote.
That's right.
So when they came to white women about this, they said, well, they ain't a sex problem. That's a race problem.
Especially Southern white women.
Yeah. So it was all good. We was all in the fight together when it was trying for everybody to vote. But now that you can't practice your vote, well, that ain't our problem. Yeah. You know what I mean? Dad, I'll let you segue into the next person we're going to talk about, which is the book is right there, The Narrative of Sojourner Truth. Amazing book. I advise you to go to Barnes & Noble, go to Amazon, cop that.
First, I'm going to say that we could do a whole week of podcasts on this lady.
Yeah.
A whole week we could probably do a podcast on her. Obviously she was born into slavery.
Yeah.
And the thing she was able to do, and I hate to use this word, but it is true. She was uneducated in terms of a formal education.
Right. When we talk about reading and writing.
Yeah. Exactly. But what she was able to do from an experience perspective, because she spoke from experience.
That's the best education.
And anybody will know, especially when you're dealing with black suffrage, is that speaking from experience, one, where there's passion, there's no need for motivation, first of all. So when you're speaking from experience, I don't need no damn motivation. I got passion, right? Because I went through it. So speaking from experience is always a benefit. But also speaking in a manner that could get people to listen is somewhat of a talent. Okay, because you can be the most educated person in the world, but if you can't communicate, doesn't mean anything. We can look at Malcolm X. Why was he the spokesperson for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad?
He could speak. Because
he could speak. Well, so could Sojourner Truth. And just real quick, her most infamous speech is the "Ain't I a Woman?" And we talked about this a little bit off the air. And the reason that came about is because they invited her to this conference, but they didn't want her to talk. They wanted her to shut up. And she agreed that I'll attend and I won't say anything. But as you just alluded to, that's all part of the plot. I just want to get on the court. Yeah, coach, I do whatever you tell me to do. When I get on the court and I get that basketball, damn that play, right?
Hey, them the tricks that black women get you with.
Absolutely.
Tell me the truth. I ain't gonna be mad.
So when they have this conference and everybody's speaking, Sojourner Truth stands up and says, "Well, ain't I a woman?" And this is a woman's movement, right? About women's rights. On our woman, and thus you have this great speech. Unfortunately, because she did not read and write, the speech wasn't written down. She ad-libbed from memory, just spoke from the heart, and a few people did document what was said. However, we don't know exactly what was said because she didn't write it down. So her most infamous speech has been misconstrued multiple times by multiple people in saying what she said. You had the well-known one where somebody tried to write what they thought she said, but they use words in a vernacular from like a slave mentality, which Sojourner Truth did not have.
And that's the key thing, is because she was born on a Dutch plantation.
That's
so
right.
She didn't speak actual English at first. She spoke Dutch.
That's right.
So when you talk about, and another thing, after New York abolishes slavery, 1827, I think, 1827.
50 years before anybody else.
1827. But her master said that she still owed him work, so he refused to free her.
That's right.
So she escaped with her infant baby to a Quaker house, but the slave master ended up selling her other son deep south. This is after the abolishment of slavery.
That's right.
So she takes it to court and actually wins that case to get her son back. So that just shows you the key, the strength and endurance of this woman. But she was key in talking about three things. Number one, like you said, her experience as a woman, her experience in slavery, because William Lloyd Garrison looked for people like this. When you talk about the Harriet Tubmans, the Frederick Douglass, and the Sojourner Truths, because I can be an abolitionist as a white man, but I can't tell you what it's like being a slave.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? So you guys experience, even though you may not be able to read and write, like Harriet Tubman couldn't read or write, Frederick Douglass could read and write, he taught himself how to read and write. But these people were the spokesman for the abolitionists, because they can give you the experience side that most people didn't understand, right? They can give you the cruelty of some of the things that was going on in slavery that most people wouldn't understand. But she began, and the third thing she talked about was her Christian principles, her religious beliefs. And she would just go around speaking at places. She would just tell crowds to come listen to her speak. I'm going to tell you what's on my heart.
That's right.
I'm going to tell you about the God that I serve. I'm going to tell you about my experience. I'm going to tell you about my book and what I had to go through. And these are the things that attracted crowds. And she had already had a name before going to that conference.
That's right.
So she was kind of like the advertisement.
That's right.
Right?
To get people there.
Yeah, to get people there. So when they got her there, they say, look, you're here just for the presence. She was like 6 foot tall.
She was 6 foot tall.
Like,
That's
you
right.
know what I'm saying? So she stood out from everybody,
That's
not alone for being black, but for how tall she was. And you know, they said she got up and walked very, very slowly up there before she made her speech. Now, again, we talked about the discrepancy on what she actually said, but one of the first things that came out of her mouth was, may I say a few words? I want to say a few words on this matter, because there was some Southern women there who, number one, didn't even want her there.
That's right.
But they definitely didn't want her to talk. They threatened to walk out if she talked, but she said, hey, may I say a few words? And one of the things that she says is, she says that I am women's rights. I have as much muscle as any man and can do as much work as any man. I have plowed and reaped and husked and chopped and mowed, and can any man do more than that? I have heard about the sexes of being equal, and I can carry as much as any man and can eat as much too. I can get it. And what she's saying is here is, I can do all of these things, but you won't let me do all of these things.
That's right.
The only thing I need is the opportunity, because we could talk about sexism, we could talk about racism, we could talk about all of these things, but a lot of it is due to the lack of opportunity.
That's right.
So you can say that the men's game and the NBA and the WNBA is two totally different leagues. We understand that. But if you don't give them the same equality and opportunity, the same advertisements, the same amount of money, the same promotion that you give the NBA, we'll never be there.
That's right.
So you can always say you're lesser than us if you don't give the opportunity.
That's right.
You can always say black kids is slower than white kids if you don't give them the proper education in a black school and the same funding that you give. So what she said in that brief moment was, all we need is the opportunity, and we'll show you.
That's
and
right.
Women have done that throughout the course of history.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I'm with you. That was one of the things that she always would say. Some of her most infamous quotes are based on her comparison to what she did versus what men did. Mm-hmm. And it's like you're saying, yeah, we know she probably can't lift as much as a man, right? but her contribution was just as equal.
But we see some women doing some lifting now that like men at the YMCA looking like,
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I
That's
mean?
right. And the thing is it doesn't matter whether they do more or less. It's that they have the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And see, that's the whole thing when we talk about affirmative action. And we've talked about it several times on this podcast. We're not saying hire the black just because they're black.
Right.
We're saying hire the black because they're equally qualified.
Yeah.
That's all we're saying is because if not for affirmative action, they won't get the opportunity.
You won't even get an interview.
So it's all about the opportunity, and then you start judging them based on their merit of work.
Right.
But you got to give them the opportunity first. And that's where we struggle, and that's what she's talking about. So a lot of the things, not to switch gears, but when we talk about what happened with women's suffrage, and all of these women had similar agendas. They wanted to talk about the lynchings and the treatment of black men being done or perpetrated by mobs, and facilitated by law enforcement. So they were basically investigative journalists, right? They were part of newspapers and magazines and pamphlets. That's what they did. And when we were talking about Ida B. Wells, she talked about federal guidelines abolishing lynching then.
We
just now signed the bill.
Just now, yeah.
So we talk about how far we came. We on bicycles.
We just got
bicycles.
We just got a bill passed of black women hairstyles. We talked about that in
Just
the
a couple
workplace.
days ago.
We just got that.
That's right.
That's been sitting on the president's desk for the last 5 presidents too. So you talk about that especially those black women who may want to wear their hair natural.
That's right.
You know what I mean? They may want to wear the braids, the
dreadlocks,
but they can't do that. Well, they couldn't do that in certain states.
That's right.
In the workplace.
That's right. I can have a tattoo on my neck and get a job, but I can't have braids.
Yeah. I can have piercings all up on my nose and all everywhere.
But the hair gotta go.
The hair. You know, and the military still enforce that your hair can't come down to your thing. So a lot of black women that have these dreadlocks have to put them up in a certain way.
That's right.
Anything else you want to add with Sojourner Truth? You still got time there.
You got something for
Sojourner? I don't.
What?
I mean, so at this conference that she spoke at, was it just all women?
Well, I think it was a few men in attendance, I believe. I'm not sure if Frederick Douglass was there or not.
I don't know.
I think one of the people who originally said they transcribed what she said was a man. That's how I can say there was a man there.
Once again, a man speaking.
But I think you kind of, if I'm looking at it in a different perspective, you kind of have to have men there because those are the people you're trying to convince.
You know what I would employ people to do with Sojourner Truth and Ida B. Wells, and any of these women, but specifically these two. Because we've already talked about them, is when you do your Google search and you go to Wikipedia, I want you to look at their accomplishments, their contributions, and how far they expand.
That's a long page.
So just the contribution. This is the first time I'm gonna tell you to do this. Yeah, read everything. That'd be great. I would love for you to. But when you get to the bottom, I just want you to look at the contributions, the decades of contributions that they've made to this country. And the span in terms of from Massachusetts to New Orleans to Chicago, look at how to California in certain cases with Sojourner Truth, the how it expanded across the United States
and internationally.
Britain, right. And you talk about that and you say, none of this is in the textbook you're gonna read in school.
I have it right here, the Wikipedia, and she has 116 references. I've been on Wikipedia of famous people, and they may only have 2.
I mean, this is amazing, and they're not in your history books.
Right.
They're not in your history.
And you're not in your history books because it was almost like we got to choose between Harriet and Sojourner Truth.
That's right.
We want to talk about 2 black women abolitionists that escaped slavery. So we're going to do one, and we're going to go with Harriet. You know, her story is a little bit more Hollywood.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And it's almost a disservice to Sojourner Truth because she has to be that person that stands behind Harriet. To some people, like, well, she didn't run like Harriet and go back and get free slaves like Harriet.
That's
but
right.
what she did was still impactful going from, and here's the thing, a lot of people still don't understand this. When we talk about New York abolishing slavery, that's one state. So for her and Frederick Douglass, remember the Slave Act.
That's right.
That if you were captured, you could be strolled back into slavery. Watch the movie 12 Years as a Slave. A show that. So when you're traveling to the Midwest and all of these other places to speak, that was a dangerous thing to do, as much as the civil rights movement as marching and going into diners and all of that stuff. Right. What they doing was just as impactful and still as dangerous. That's why Frederick Douglass had to go to London. That's right. For a few years, because he thought that his slave master was going to come back and try to take him to court to bring him back into slavery. That's right. So that's a key thing too. So they don't understand the dangers that came with that. Y'all good on?
One more thing about Ida B. Wells too. When you Google Ida B. Wells, I want you to look at the house she lived in. This lady was elegant. Yeah. This lady was elegant.
A part of the elite.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought, and kudos to you too, because the women that you selected that we go through on this podcast, there was two varieties. One, you had the formal educated, and then you had the informal educated, right? That both has similar impacts on the movements. And I'm saying movements with an S, because there was multiple movements going on that these women was associated with. And all of them surrounded two things: Black rights and women rights. But you had people attacking this from multiple fronts. And you can't say enough that most of this went on in terms of the suffrage. In those states that I always talk about. Yes, New York still had racism, and it still exists today. So does Massachusetts and all these. So does Illinois. I know you hear most of these people migrated to Chicago. We talk about that all the time. Yeah. Most of your people end up going from Mississippi and from Alabama and from Georgia, and they're going to Chicago. But you had the similar issues in Chicago. But you mostly hear about this suffrage in those southern states, ones that were impacted by Jim Crow laws. Which is why when blacks got the money, they decided that they were going to go north. They wanted to get away from, not because of just jobs. Jobs was important, but obviously we know the jobs didn't exist, because when we talk about Cabrini Green in Chicago, you had all these people that migrated to Chicago and with no damn jobs. Yeah. Right? But it was enough just to get away from what was going on in the South,
We're at 46 minutes now. We're just going to stick with these two for today. Okay. We're just going to stick for these two today. And something else about Ida B. Wells, because you talked about her, she was considered more of the elite class of Chicago. But there was an organization, I can't remember the name of it. There was an organization created right in the midst of the Great Migration from other elite black people in Chicago. And they created their organization. There were churches and all these other people who created these organizations because they felt that they were better than the Southern people coming up.
That's right.
Because they didn't speak the same. They weren't looking for jobs. So they felt that they had created their own avenue in Chicago to where they had some type of influence with white people. So they felt like the blacks coming in was going to hurt that. Ida B. Wells didn't buy into that. Like I said, she started that league right in smack in the hood. There was a guy who was a well-known gambler and had a gambling establishment who said that, I want to start my own theater in Chicago. And Ida B. Wells helped them. She helped organize a fundraiser for it to bring in people who can do dance and sing and all of these things. And the church protested against her on it. They said they didn't want her to have relationships with people like that. A church that she went to, they spoke out against her. And she said, I don't care. We're going to do it. We're going to put it right.
Not a church.
Yeah. We're going to put it right smack into the hood. And it's good. And that created the avenue of where people later on began to perform at. but it was because Ida B. Wells decided that she was going to help this gambler, this hustler, put this organization together. She didn't care if you was rich. She didn't care if you was elite. She didn't care if you was a sharecropper coming up. She didn't care if you was a addict or a gambler. If it was progress to be made, it was to be made. And there's so many people who don't have that mindset because she traveled the world and she's seen so many different types of people that her life was contributed to helping Black people no matter what.
Yep. And she went against people that she would have considered a friend.
Right.
She went against them, and we talked about that with Frederick Douglass, and
right,
Booker T. Washington, and Willard.
Yeah.
She went against those folks. If those folks did, Mary Terrell in Chicago,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Another activist during that time that wanted to silence, if you will, Ida B. Wells, and she went against the grain. Right. If she did not think it was going to help Black women, she went against it.
Yeah.
And anything that she thought was going to help the cause, she did.
Right.
Again, keep in mind, none of this was for them. She didn't go through any of that for her. She went through it for people like us.
And the funny thing is, she didn't get the respect, and we still see this today. When you think about lynchings in the South, who were most likely to be lynched in the South?
Black men.
Black men. So I'm not speaking for Black women being lynched. I'm speaking for Black men. So when you can't afford me that same type of support, then it's a problem. And what do we see mostly in the Black community today? Black women advocating for keeping the safety of Black men.
That's right.
But we always see the most disrespectful woman is the Black woman by Black men. You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
And that's one of the things that we see as a race, that racism and sexism comes into our own community and our own culture, is it isn't always ideal for our Black women, but we do it to them on a life space. This is one podcast I wish we could have had a Black woman on here to get her perspective. That is something that's going to happen. If you listen to this podcast as a Black woman and you would like to speak on this, contact me so we can try to get you on here, because I would love to go in depth on these conversations. I know we talk about that. It probably, if you look at it in the general situation, that Black women, these Black women specifically, may not get the credit that they deserve. Maybe universally, definitely within the United States, but within the areas that they contributed, oh, they did. Right.
And they do. I mean, I think about Ida B. Wells in Chicago. If I'm not mistaken, she has the first housing project named after a woman in the United States. Mm-hmm. Right? Which is huge. And I know people say, well, that's not a great thing to be remembered for. It is. When you have a housing issue and you need somewhere for those folks to go. People talk about the projects all the time and housing projects being bad. Well, the idea was not bad. Yeah. The result was bad based on the politics surrounding it, the right? Funding. But the idea was a great idea. That's why it's called housing projects. It was a project.
It was a project.
It was a project.
The problem came with building outward from building outward.
How do you sustain this projects and the people that's in it? Because you have to have employment. And again, it goes back to what we said on previous podcasts. If you put Black people in that situation, but they control nothing in that area, what is it? Another form of segregation.
Yeah. That's the thing. Is most of the time when you go to like these universities, these dorms or these gyms are named after donors because they donated the money, where the housing projects were named after people who advocated for
absolutely. That's a great point. That's a great point.
And, that's why you got your Malcolm X Boulevards and Martin Luther King drives and all these other places. I mean, we have our just due, but we just got to start taking care of it. We just got to take care of our Black women.
And we just seen it. I ain't gonna say no names, but this year in rec league football, we seen it where most people took their kids to play in another county because a Black woman stood up and said, "I'll coach," because there wasn't enough men. And I'm not gonna say a name, but they won the Super Bowl. So
facts.
You're all welcome.
Facts, and that just shows you, the discrepancy, and we still deal with sexism today. I can't count how many times I get on Instagram and I see a dope WNBA video and the comments is like, who watches the
Yeah, why
WNBA
y'all
and all
keep
this other
posting
stuff.
this?
You know, it's
the main
horrible
one
because-
is get back to the kitchen.
yeah, yeah. But you know, this is just touching bases of we could go a whole 6 months on just talking about women, talking about directors, actors, singers, all of
That's
these things. We'll be all day talking about black
It's
women.
just, if we talk about these women, and these women were instrumental to leading to the first black to actually run for president, man or woman, which was actually a woman.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of what these women did and just historically what black women have done for this country, again, goes back to what we say on every podcast. I think that word hatred is so large and alive today that continues to want to put black people in a box, continue wanting to put us in a certain light in terms of this country, which is enslaved.
Right.
They want to attach that. So when you go from enslaved, okay, you're not enslaved anymore, but then the next word is inferior. Okay, so we went from being enslaved to inferior. So where are we right now? So we're not slaves, but are we still treated as inferior? Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. So what these women did was to try to get us to the next level. We're not at the next level yet.
Yeah.
People may think we are. Okay, Barack Obama won presidency. That's it? That's
Right.
it? They gave us Juneteenth Day. My bad.
Yeah.
So we're there. No, we're still not there. We're still not there.
Absolutely. We're gonna pick this topic back up next week. Just marinate on this. Go get that book. Go do your research on these two women that we talked about today, because more is about to come. We love y'all. Peace.